Hi, I'm Norie from the Great Northern Book Company, and I've got a lot of books for your book fair, and I want to show you some of them that I think you're going to especially like. Most of them are new, but one of them, to be able to understand, you have to know this one, Edward the Emu. This came out maybe about 6-7 years ago, and I absolutely love this. This has always been one of my favorites. It's Edward the Emu was sick of the zoo. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do, and compared to the seals that lived right next door, well, being an emu was frankly a bore. So that night after the zookeeper left, he hopped the fence and he went to live with the seals, and he did seal things until one day a man came by and he said it wasn't the seals that were neat, it was really the lions. So that night he hopped the fence again and he went and lived with the lions, and he did lionly things. I love the pictures in these books. As you can see, he's copying the lion right down to the way he sleeps. But then he heard it was the snakes that were really the neatest. So that night he hopped the fence, and the next day he was living with the snakes, and he was doing all kinds of snaky things until he heard somebody said that really the emu was the neatest thing to see in the zoo. So he said, well, if that's the best, it's easy then. Tomorrow I'm Edward the Emu again. And he hops the fence, and Edward ran to the place where he used to reside, but oh, what a shock when he clambered inside. He found himself suddenly come face to face with the emu they'd brought in to take Edward's place. The emus considered each other a while, then the new little emu said with a shy little smile, "Hello, I'm Edwina. It's nice meeting you. You're the best thing I've seen since I came to the zoo." Isn't that darling? I just love it. So, last spring, when Edwina the emu came out, I was really excited, and this is just as good as that first one. You see, there once were two emus who lived in the zoo. One was Edwina and Edward was two. They played every day, there was never a fight, and they cuddled up close to keep warm every night. As they sat there one day entwining their legs, Edwina announced she'd laid 10 little eggs. "Eek!" shouted Edward. He seemed to be choking. 10 little emus? You've got to be joking." "I'm not," said Edwina, "but don't get depressed. I'll look for a job. You stay on the nest." So the next day you can see her looking for a job in the newspaper, and she found an ad that said that ballerinas were wanted. So she thought that she would audition for this ballet. But, eek! The man shouted. He seemed to be choking. "An emu dance ballet? You've got to be joking." "I'm not," said Edwina, "but don't laugh at me. I'll find the right job soon. You just wait and see." Well, so you see her on a bus, and what she found was a job sweeping chimneys, and she thought that would be just perfect for her. But when she reached the bottom of the fireplace, "Eek!" said the lady. She seemed to be choking. "An emu sweep chimneys? You've got to be joking." "I'm not," said Edwina, "but don't laugh at me. I'll find the right job soon. You just wait and see." So next you see her on a bus, and she found out that she could get a job waiting tables. Edwina served tea to a man in a hat. "Would you like me to bring you a meal with that?" "Yes," said the man. "I'll have sausages fried with a couple of nice runny eggs on the side." "Eek!" said Edwina. She seemed to be choking. "You want to eat eggs? You've got to be joking." "I'm not," said the man. "Eating eggs is the best. Once I ate 10 of them straight from the nest." Well, Edwina ran out. She ran into the street. It was true when she said she was quick on her feet. "Taxi," she cried, "take me home, make it fast. I know what the right job for me is at last." It was late when Edwina got back to the nest. "You're late," muttered Edward, "and I need a rest." Now, who's been sitting around all day? "You're right," said Edwina. "From now on we share. I'll sit on the nest. You pull up a chair." There once were 12 emus who lived in the zoo. One was Edwina, and Edward was two. Then Fluffy and Scruffy and Sniffly Sneeze, and Fatty and Footloose and Knobbly Knees, and Lollipop Legs and Shortening and Squeak, and the last little emu, they called that one Eek. Love this book. Okay. Now there's a couple of new what we call fairy tale spin-offs, and Cinderella Bigfoot is one of them, and this is just darling. Once upon a time, about 8:30, in the land of make-believe, there lived a girl named Cinderella. Now, there were a lot of funny-looking people in the land of make-believe, but Cinderella was the funniest. Her most outstanding feature was her big feet. When she stood up, she looked like a seaplane. Cinderella lived with her beautiful stepmother and her 3 beautiful stepsisters, Weenie, Whinie, and Mo. She also had a beautiful stepcat, a stepdog, and a stepladder. The size of Cinderella's feet caused her many problems. She bounced off the ceiling in ballet class. She always lost at hopscotch, and she had to buy a sock for every toe. However, the worst problem for everyone else was when Cinderella's bunions bothered her. She'd take off her shoes and leave them all around town. The giant, smelly shoes would block doorways, stop traffic, and take up 4 parking spaces at the mall. So when the king and queen in the land of make-believe gave a dance party, they naturally didn't invite Cinderella. What happened to her? Of course, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to read the book and find out. One of my all-time favorite authors is Patricia Polacco, and this book has been out for a while in hardcover, but now it's out in paperback. And I really like this because this tells about when Patricia was growing up in southern Michigan, which is where I grew up, and she would visit her grandmother's farm in the summer. And she loved being there, except one thing she did not like were thunderstorms. And what she would do when she heard the thunder rumbling, she would hide under the bed. You can see her with her feet just sticking out underneath the bed. And Grandma came in and she says, "It's only thunder you're hearing." And she said that what we're going to do is we're going to bake a thunder cake today. So while the thunder was rumbling, what little Patricia and her grandmother did is they gathered eggs and they milked the cow and they did all kinds of things to get ready to bake this cake. And the thunder was rumbling and the storm was coming closer and closer. But little Patricia was all excited about this cake, and so she wasn't worried about it. And finally, at the very end, they had their cake, and on the very last page, you'll see a recipe for making her grandmother's thunder cake. So a real fun book, and you're going to see a lot more of these picture books in your book fair. Now, you'll also see a lot of these beginning to read books, and one of the new ones for this year is called Volcanoes. And the reason I like this is it not only tells you about volcanoes, but it tells you about a very special one that happened here in 1980. Now, I remember this very well, but I'm sure you don't, but I'll bet you your parents do. This was about when Mount St. Helens blew up. The volcano just pushed through the top of that mountain, and it tells all about that because what happened, you see all this ash that's spewing out of the volcano, and it got as far as Missoula, and I know into the middle of Montana and even beyond. And you weren't even supposed to go out. You couldn't drive your car because it clogged the engine, and it was just terrible. A lot of people were killed, including this man who had a lodge, and he just refused to move. He had lived beneath Mount St. Helens for years, and he wasn't going to move. And unfortunately, his house was covered with 40 feet of ash. So, a neat book. Another one from another company in those beginning to read stories is Terror Below. And I thought this was really interesting because it tells you all about sharks. And did you know that more people are killed by bee stings every year than by sharks? There's a lot of good information, but it also has the story of 3 men who survived shark attacks. And one of them, his head was inside the shark's mouth and the shark was clamping down on his neck. How did that guy get away from that shark? And of course, I'm not going to tell you. You've got to read the book and find out. Okay, for you sports fans, and I am one of them, here is a brand new book this fall that's telling you about 4 different football stars. Now, my hero happens to be this guy, Jerry Rice, who up until this season never missed a football game. But he says that he's going to play again this year, and we'll see. The other men in this book is talking about are Troy Aikman and Deion Sanders and Barry Sanders, who just has broken a new record too. So a real neat book if you're into football. A neat story that is in one of these beginning to read books is this book called True Blue. Blue is this old hunting dog, and he belongs to this little girl named TJ. Now, TJ and Blue are very close. They do everything together. And they have a friend, this elderly gentleman, who has an old dog named Molasses. And when Molasses comes over, Blue and Molasses play together. They have all kinds of fun. Well, one day Dad goes out hunting and takes Blue with him, and at night he doesn't. And when the dad comes home, Blue isn't with him. And of course, TJ is just all upset. And she goes to try to find him the next day, and she can't. Then she goes out the following day, and she sees a campfire, meaning that poachers have been in the area. And then she calls Blue, and he comes running through the woods, but he won't go home with her. Now, why won't he go home with her? I'm going to let you read the rest of the story, because this is a good one. Okay, one of my favorite books that came out last spring was My Mom the Frog. And this is about a boy named Jason who discovers right at the beginning of the book that he has a wart on his hand, and he's all freaked out about this. But his mom says, oh, don't worry, I'll go to the pharmacy tomorrow, get medicine, and it'll take care of your wart. And she kisses it to let him know that it's no big deal. Well, the next morning he wakes up and he discovers that his wart is bigger. And he lets out a yell, and his sister comes in to his bedroom, and he tells her the story about what Mother did and that she kissed the wart, and she says, do you know what's going to happen to Mom? Because she kissed your wart, she's going to turn into a frog. Well, Jason isn't going to believe that, so he goes running downstairs, and he sees Dad eating breakfast. And he asks Dad where Mom is. And Dad says, I don't know, and her purse is on the floor. And Jason sees that next to her purse is a frog, and he is sure that is his mother. And that's all I'm going to tell you about this book, but this is fun. Another neat book by one of my favorite authors is called Tornado. This is a very short book, but a neat, exciting book about a boy who lives in tornado country, like in the middle of the United States. And one day on his farm, they see that a tornado is coming. And so their farmhand, Pete, tells them that they've got to get in the storm cellar. So while they're in the storm cellar, Pete tells them stories about when he was a boy growing up in tornado country. And what happened is that one day they had a tornado, and it blew into their farmyard this doghouse, and inside was this black dog, and they named it Tornado. And the fun things that they did with Tornado, they taught him card tricks, and he also had a run-in with a cat named 530. Now, why do you think a cat would be named 530? I'm going to let you read this book and find out, but it is a neat story. Another wonderful story, a series, is Cat Wings. This is the first one. The one that's going to be in, and I'll try to have this one in, but the one that I'm going to have in your book fair is the newest one called The Wonderful World of Cat Wings. And this is the story of a regular old cat, not one that has wings on it, but a regular old cat who goes out. He is the oldest one in the litter, and he's really brave, and then he gets treed, and he doesn't dare get out of this tree, and he's rescued by Janie, one of the cat wings. Now, Janie won't speak, and there's a reason for that. And again, I'm going to let you read the book and find out, but a wonderful adventure story. Another series that I think is just really good is this Dragonling series, and this is the fourth one in the series, and this is called The Dragons of Crad. Now, Derek is the boy that got the first Dragonling, and he called him Xantor. Now, his best friend in the village is a boy by the name of Pola. And Pola and Xantor, his dragonling, get carried away into Crad, an area where there are these spooky-looking guys, and nobody has ever come back from Crad alive. Well, Derek and the chief elder's daughter, Rowena, know that they have to rescue Xantor and Polo. So they go into Crad, in the area of Crad, and look at the creatures that they meet. And like I said, nobody comes back alive out of Crad. And that's all I'm going to tell you about this book. Junie B. Jones is always a favorite of mine, and also at book fairs. You know, this is that kindergartner who is just a little bit on the naughty side, and she does all kinds of funny things. Well, one day in kindergarten, there is a boy in her room that tells her that there is a monster under her bed. And she says, I know there can't be a monster under that bed because I check every day and there's no monster under there. Well, then the boy tells her that when she looks at the monster, he becomes invisible. So of course she can't see him under her bed. So Judy B. Jones goes home that night and she tells Grandma that there's a monster under her bed. Well, Grandma says, well, just get rid of it. And she says, no, because it's invisible. Well, this poor Jones family has a terrible time trying to get rid of this invisible monster under Junie's bed. Okay, there's a new Magic Tree House, and this one is neat because it takes place in the West, a good 120 years ago. Ghost town at sundown, and you have Jack and Jenny, and they meet up with this cowboy named Slim, and what they're trying to do is rescue some Mustangs that have been stolen by these rustlers. Foolish Gretel is a neat story. It takes place in Galveston, Texas, which is on the ocean. Probably about 120 years ago, and Gretel is the youngest of 3 girls. Her father has died, mother owns this millinery store. This is where you make hats. And into the store comes this black servant lady one day, and she just wants the scraps that are on the floor that they're going to throw away. But the mother is very haughty, and so are the daughters, and they say, no, you can't have those scraps. We don't want to have anything to do with you. Well, Gretel is this very caring girl, so she gathers the scraps after the lady leaves and gives them to her. And this happens time and time again, where the rest of the family is mean to this lady, and but Gretel is nice. Then at the end of the story, something happens. It's kind of like a Cinderella story, really. And something happens where this black lady can help Gretel. Neat story, great historical fiction. Another good one, and this is the 3rd of a series, Shadow of the Wolf. This is about Libby and Fawn. First in this series was Next Spring an Oriole and A Night of the Full Moon. This too takes place in Michigan, and this time Libby and her friend Fawn live on the western edge of the lower peninsula in the upper part of that peninsula. Anyway, it takes place, like I said, a long time ago. The white people are trying to get a hold of the Indians' land, and Libby's father is trying to prevent this. Now, at one point, Fawn's father had trapped this wolf, and Libby did not want to see the wolf killed, so she talked Fawn into letting it go. And then how this wolf helped the 2 girls in the end is really a neat story. This one is a fun book, Pleasing the Ghost. The author of this, Sharon Creech, won the Newbery Award for Walk 2 Moons, but this one is really fun. This is about a boy named Dennis, whose dad has just died recently. He has an uncle who died a year ago, and this sounds very sad, and it is, but there's a lot of humor in this story. Now, what happens is that this Uncle Arvy, comes back to Dennis because he wants Dennis to help him do 3 things that he wasn't able to do before he died. And they involve Dennis's Aunt Julia, who is Uncle Arvy's wife. Now, Uncle Arvy had a stroke, and this led to his death. And because of this stroke, he could not speak very clearly. And so one thing he said to Dennis, he said, "Fragglepin Hartfoot, a wig pasta?" Now, do you know what he's saying? Dennis didn't. I don't. So Dennis had to figure out what Uncle Arvy was telling him. Well, they went over to Aunt Julia's house, and Aunt Julia had this boyfriend, this guy that is trying to win her affections, as they say, and his name is Colin. Well, Uncle Arvy didn't like him at all, so he called him Beanie Booger. Well, Beanie Booger gave Aunt Julia a box of chocolates, and one of the things that Uncle Arvy did while he was over there is he punched the tops of the chocolates. So when Aunt Julia got them, they were all schmucked. And needless to say, she was not impressed with Beanie Booger, and that's just what Uncle Arvy wanted. Okay, another good book is called Indian School. This is by the same author that did Shadow of the Wolf, and this is a lady that lives in Michigan. That's why all of her books are set in Michigan. But this happens in the Upper Peninsula in the 1830s. And what happened is that Lucy, the white girl in this picture, is an orphan. She's about 10 years old, and she is sent to spend the rest of her life, or the rest of her growing up years, with her uncle and aunt that run a boarding school for Indian children. And her aunt is very hard on these Indian children. She's very harsh. And Lucy doesn't like it at all. She doesn't think it's fair. Well, one day this Indian girl is brought into this school along with her younger brother, and her name is Raven, and she is not going to put up with this aunt and how harsh she is, and so she runs away. And so Lucy has to summons up the courage to face her aunt and tell her that she is wrong. Another neat piece of historical fiction is Bess's Log Cabin Quilt. If you like the Laurel Ingalls Wilder books, you're going to really like this. Bess lives out in Oregon. Her father takes people from the Midwest along the Oregon Trail into Oregon. Now what happens is that he doesn't show up when he is supposed to. And so people are saying, gosh, maybe something happened to your dad, but Bess and her mother hold on to the hope that dad is okay. Now, Mom comes down with a swamp fever, so she is really sick and everything is falling in on Bess. The bank owner says that Dad owes $100 on their place and he's going to have to foreclose if the money isn't paid. And so what does Bess do to try to offset this situation? It has to do with a quilting contest in town. Neat story. One that I think is so much fun. Absolutely love Dick King-Smith and the books that he does. The Three Terrible Twins is the story of these three mice. Before they were born, this cat killed their father. So their mother is bound and determined to have these little mice just make life miserable for all the cats on this farm, as well as the farmer who has these little mouse traps all over the place. And this is just, I laughed out loud so many times at this book. It is just a lot of fun. Then there's An Owl in the Shower, a new one in paperback by Jean Craighead George, who does such a wonderful job with her books. And this is about a boy named Borden who lives in Northern California. His dad has lost his lumbering job. He goes out in the woods and cuts trees because of the spotted owl controversy. And so Dad's home all the time. The family is depressed because there's no money coming in. And Borden is bound and determined he's going to go out and shoot all those spotted owls. Then his dad can have his job back. Well, one day he finds this little baby owl out in the woods, and it's too young to tell that it's a spotted owl. So Borden is sure that it's another kind of owl, and he knows this little owl is going to die if he leaves him out there, so he takes him home. And what does the little owl do? Borden has to go to bed at night, but Dad's up all night, and so it's Dad that ends up taking care of this owl, and the owl imprints on Dad. And so they become fast friends. Then what happens when Dad discovers this is a spotted owl? Neat story. A good adventure story. This is the second one in the series. Call Me Francis Tuckett. This is about a boy that was lost. Well, not lost. He was captured by Indians when he was going along the Oregon Trail with his parents. And then he was captured by a mountain man, and he escaped, so he escaped from the Indians. And this is the second in the series, and he is no longer with that mountain man, and he is on his own. He has all kinds of adventures, but probably the one that was most memorable to me was when he was going along and he saw this wagon that had been on the wagon train. And he noticed two small children inside this wagon. There's no mother, no father. And what he found out was that mother had died of the diseases that were so prevalent among these people that went out west on these wagon trains, and that they made the father take the wagon train people made the father take the wagon and leave the wagon train, and then Dad got sick. And so obviously these kids are now without Dad and all on their own. So obviously Francis has to take these two kids with him. And what happens? Great story. Again, if you like to laugh, any book by Gordon Corman is going to give you a chuckle. But this one is really fun. Why did the underwear cross the road? Okay, this is a story of a fourth grader named Justin Zeckendorf. And like I said, he's in fourth grade, and there is a contest. It's called the Good Deed Contest. And what happens is that there are three kids are paired up for this contest, okay? And they're paired up according in alphabetical order. So poor Justin is paired up with the last two girls in the alphabet. and they are to do these good deeds. But every time they think of something, and it's usually Justin's idea, it backfires. So towards the end of the book, everybody else has like 30 and 40 points, and the Z's, the three Z's, have a -40. Well, what are they going to do? It is just lots of fun. And I know that you guys like good mysteries, and these Herculia Jones mysteries are a lot of fun. The girl's name is Herculia. Her dad is a police detective. Her mother is a private eye, and so it's in the genes. She loves a good mystery. And there is a lady that lives nearby named Madame Rosa who does fortune telling. And she has a parrot called Taro. Well, one day, Herculia goes by Madame Rosa's house, and she knows the front door is open, and Taro is sitting out on the porch. And Herculia knows something is wrong, and so she goes in and she discovers that Madame Rosa has been murdered. So she's going to try to find the phone so that she can call 911 when she hears these sounds in the house, and she is sure that the murderer is still in the house. And that's all I'm going to tell you. Night of Fear is another good mystery by Peg Kayrit. This is about a boy named TJ. And in the afternoon one day, TJ and his parents hear that the town bank has been robbed and the robber has gotten away. Now, TJ is an only child, and he has a grandmother who has Alzheimer's that's living in the house with TJ and his parents. His parents have to go to a meeting at school, leaving TJ at home alone with his grandmother. Well, the neighbor next door calls, and they say that they're not going to be home that night, and would TJ please go and feed their animals in the barn. So, of course, TJ goes over, but he can't leave his grandmother. So he tells her that he's going to take her to church because having Alzheimer's, she's lost her mind. So they get over to the barn, and this creepy guy comes out of the hay, and TJ is sure that it's his bank robber. And this guy wants to take TJ and Grandma hostage, but TJ talks him into leaving Grandma in the barn, and he tells Grandma just to stay there until the minister comes, because she still thinks he's gone to church. Okay, so he goes off, and with this guy who he thinks is the bank robber, but the bank robber person, this guy, keeps setting fires, and TJ can't figure it out. In the meantime, Grandma thinks that the minister isn't going to show up, and she wants to go home, so she wanders outside, and of course she gets lost. So there's a lot of action in this story, and a lot of fun. Running Out of Time is one of the books on the Young Reader's Choice list this year, and I think it is great, a lot of fun. This is about Jessie, who is growing up in Clifton, Indiana, back in 1840. And so her life is just like the Little House on the Prairie type of life, except she notices these black boxes up in the trees, and nobody will tell her what those black boxes are for. Well, one day, some of the kids start getting sick in school, and they're not getting the medicine. The doctor isn't helping them like he is supposed to. And finally, Jessie's mother pulls her aside, and she says, we're not living in the 1840s. We're in an experiment, and we're really living in the 1990s. And we have got to get help for these people, these kids that are dying of this disease. So she tells Jessie how to get out of this place, and she dresses her up in her old clothes. Of course, Jessie has never seen anything like this. Now imagine what it would be like to go from the 1840s all of a sudden into the 1990s. And of course, there's men after Jessie because they want this experiment to continue, and they don't want her to get out, even though she has managed to get out. So what happens? A lot of excitement, and yet think of the confusion that Jessie feels when she's out, and she's never seen a car, she's never seen an airplane, she's never seen paved streets, she's never seen a television, big buildings, nothing. Very good book. Another one of my favorites on that list is Thunder Cave. This is excellent. This is about a boy named Jacob, whose father is a Hopi Indian, and his mother is really a neat gal. But the parents split up, and Dad went to Africa, to Kenya, to study elephants, and Mom remarried. Now, Mom was killed in an accident when this story began, and the stepfather was going to send Jacob to live with relatives that he did not like and he did not want to go and live with. So he takes all of his money out of his savings account, and he gets an airplane ticket and takes him to Kenya because he is looking for Dad. Now, he meets up with Supit, who is a Maasai young man from Africa, and together they go out in the bush to try to find Dad. Now, Dad is doing this research on these elephants that are becoming extinct because poachers are killing them for their wonderful tusks. And the poachers have a radio, and so they've been able to intercept all of the messages that Jacob has been sending to his dad. So Dad does not know that Jacob is there and trying to find him. And so what the poachers do is they capture Jacob, and they're holding him hostage because they want to know where that last herd of elephants is, and only Jacob's father does. That's all I'm going to tell you. Wonderful adventure story. Good historical fiction, again, based on truth. I really like this book, Waiting for Anya. This is a story of about a boy named Joe who lives in France during World War II, and he's helping an elderly lady who lives up in the country get these Jewish kids over the border into Spain. Now, in Spain, they're going to be safe, so it's very important that this happens. And the grandmother is waiting for her granddaughter called Anya to come through, and that's kind of the reason why she's doing this in the first place. Now, the Germans find out about this connection, and they send this German patrol up to patrol the border. And so now the border is closed, and this this group of Nazis are living in Joe's town. And of course they have told him, anybody that's helping these Jewish kids or any Jew will be shot. But Joe continues to bring food up to this lady to feed these kids. And it's getting to look really suspicious, him bringing all this food for one little bitty old lady. So what happens? In the meantime, he meets this elderly man who is a very fatherly figure, a nice man who is wearing a Nazi uniform. He is forced to be a German soldier. So there's a lot of interesting things in this book. Again, one of my favorite authors is Will Hobbs. This book is new in paperback at Kokopelli's Flute. This is about a boy that lives in the Four Corners area of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And one night he's going camping with his dog near one of these old ruins when he hears commotion coming from that ruin, and he discovers that there's pot robbers that are stealing these ancient pots and artifacts. And so he and his dog, they scare the pot robbers away, and they go to see what they have uncovered. And he finds this old flute, and when he plays it, it makes him change into a bushy-tailed wood rat at night. In the day, he becomes a boy. At night, he becomes a wood rat. And so we've got a lot of different things going on in this book because, of course, he wants to keep the pot robbers from coming back. Of course, he wants to change back into a boy. How's he going to do it? This character comes into their life, and he is Kokopelli. They find out that he's Kokopelli, and who is part of Indian lore. Like I said, there's a lot going on in this book. Mother is studying the hantavirus, which is has caused the death of many Indians down in that area. And then what happens when she comes down with it? Like I said, I could go on and on. Another new one from Will that is a great adventure story is called Far North. This is about a boy from Texas who is going to school because his dad has work up in the Western Territories of Canada. And up there in his school is an Indian boy named Gabe. And one day, an Indian boy named Raymond. And one day, Gabe is going to go visit his father, and Raymond is with him because Raymond wants to go home. He's sick of the school. He wants to go back to his tribe. Well, Raymond's uncle, who has been in the hospital, is also aboard this plane. Well, just like in Canyon Winter and Hatchet, plane goes down on the river and crashes. The pilot is killed, leaving Gabe and Raymond and the uncle to survive in this wilderness area where there is little or no game, and it is in the middle of winter. It is really a bad scene. It is so cold up there that the trees crack. It sounds like a gunshot. Wonderful, wonderful survival story. Now, I know many of you have heard about this wonderful lady that lives near Missoula, Hanneke Ippich, and this is her story of going through World War II in Holland. Now, she was a teenager at that time. This is what she looked like, and she was able to do, she worked for the Dutch resistance. In fact, one time what she had to do, she had to take the equivalent of $3 million in Dutch guilders from Amsterdam to the eastern side of Holland. And the only traffic on the road at that time were the trucks that belonged to the Nazis. And she knew she was never going to get to the eastern side of Holland with that money before the curfew, and she'd be in big trouble if she didn't. So what she did, she hooky-bobbed on the back of this truck. She hung onto the truck with one hand, her handlebars with the other, This $1 million was secreted in a loaf of bread in her bike basket, and she got to the other side. Now, she was captured in this endeavor, and not one when she had the money, but anyway, she was put into prison, and her cell was right in the second floor. Now, the prisoners that were like the murderers and the robbers were put on the first floor, and they were allowed to have radios, so they heard what was happening in the war effort, and they would call up the pipes to Hanukkah, and then she would tell the more dangerous, supposedly political prisoners on the third floor what was happening. And one day she was caught doing that, and she was put into solitary confinement for 5 days. There was no light, there was no heat, and this was January. There was no food, there was no water, of course there was no toilet facilities, there was no bed, nothing. And I said to her before she wrote this book, I said, well, how did you survive? I know you can live for a while without food, but how do you survive without water? And she said, in this darkness, she heard a dripping. And so she caught that moisture in her hand, and she licked that moisture, and that's what kept her alive. And I said, Hanukkah, do you know what you were licking? And she said, no, it didn't matter. It kept me alive. Ugh. Well, also during that time, before she was thrown into solitary confinement, she was able to get letters to her family. She did these teeny tiny letters, and she hid them in the laundry labels, just kind of like the labels that we have in the back of our shirts. And these are she still has these little letters. Now, her folks, when they got her laundry, they would send back letters to her tucked in these laundry labels, but she would have to eat them. Because if she didn't eat them and she was caught with them, again, she would be thrown into solitary confinement. Wonderful book, wonderful lady. Okay, To Race a Dream, great historical fiction. Takes place in 1906 in Minnesota. This is about a girl named Theo who would love to be a jockey. She loves working with horses, but in that day and age, that wouldn't happen. So what she did, she lived next door, real close to the farm that had the legendary racehorse called Dan Patch, and she dreamed of being able to race Dan Patch. So she dressed up as a boy and got a job as a farmhand on this farm. And a wonderful story. If you like horses, you're really going to be able to identify with that. Okay, another piece of historical fiction by Gloria Whelan, Once on This Island. This is the story of Mary O'Shea. It takes place on Mackinac Island, which is an island between the lower peninsula and the upper peninsula of Michigan. And this takes place in the War of 1812. Now, the British took over the island, and Mary was living with her dad and her older brother and sister on the island on a farm. Now, Dad was not about to live under British rule, so he left and he joined the fighting troops in Fort Detroit, which of course is now Detroit, leaving Mary and her older brother and sister to take care of the farm. And what happened with their relationship with the British and how things got so deplorable that people were stealing animals and food. And what part does this Native American boy play in this story? Neat story. Another good piece of historical fiction, Moon of Two Dark Horses. This takes place during the Revolutionary War time. This is about a Delaware Indian boy named Koshmo and the settler boy named Daniel. They grew up together. They were great friends. But then as the Revolutionary War came closer and closer, the British wanted the Indians to fight for them and against the settlers. So what happens to this friendship? Very good story. I don't know how many of you recognize this author, Sally Keene. She was the one that wrote the book I Am Not Regina, or I Am Regina, a very good book. Okay, fun historical fiction by another one of my favorite authors, The Gentleman, Outlaw, and Me, Eli. This is about a girl named Eliza who was growing up in the Midwest, obviously a good 120 years ago, maybe 130, and her dad had gone out west to search for gold in Colorado. And unfortunately, Mother died, and Eliza was left with her uncle and aunt. And supposedly, Dad was supposed to be sending money back to him. Well, the uncle and aunt said no, he wasn't sending money, and they made her work like a slave. So she had it. So she faked her death. She cut her hair, dressed up as a boy, and she started out west to try to find her father. along the way, she met this 19-year-old boy who fancied himself as a gentleman outlaw. Now, he needed Eli's help, not knowing that Eli was a girl. And so together they go out west, and they have all kinds of fun adventures together. And what happens when Eli does find her dad, and he thinks that she's a boy? Another good story is Jimmy Spoon and the Pony Express. I hope that all of you have had a chance to read the story of, or the legend of Jimmy Spoon, because that was a great book. And Jimmy lived in Utah, and his dad owned a large retail store, and Jimmy just got tired of being in that retail store, and that was why the story of the legend of Jimmy Spoon came to be. Well, after that happened, he's back in his dad's store, and he's getting bored. So he decides to join the Pony Express, and he's stationed in a station in Nebraska. And this Pony Express didn't last all that long, but it was a very colorful time in our history. One of the things that happened, he met up with Mark Twain and his brother, who were going out west. Now, Mark Twain came through on a stagecoach, and it was very hot. And since there were no women riding in the stagecoach, Mark Twain and his brother took all of their clothes off except for their underwear and rode on the stage in their long underwear. And when they reached the stage station where Jimmy was, they were still sitting around in their underwear telling them stories. Then another person that Jimmy meets is the legendary Jack Slade. Now, Jack Slade played a very important part, not important part, but a very interesting part in Montana history, and it has to do with the vigilantes. And I'm going to tell you that story, and it's not in this book, but I think it would be neat if you would research that and find out what happened to Jack Slade. Fun book. Red Sky in the Morning. Another good piece of historical fiction. This takes place in 1909, and this is the story of Callie, who's living on a farm with her mother and her older sister and her grandfather, who she calls Opa, German word for grandfather. Dad has gone out west to try to find a farm in Oregon. Okay, Mom dies in childbirth, and then Kathleen, her older sister, who wants to be a school teacher, but she can't afford the schooling, decides to go work for an aunt who is very, very hard on her. So leaving Callie and Grandpa to make things work on this farm, and things are really tough, and then the diphtheria epidemic hits, leaving a lot of people just shattered in the community. Neat story. Now, in your book fair, you will find this book in paperback. I don't have my paperback copies yet, but this is a wonderful story by Montana's own Ben Michelson. This is a story of the first junior astronaut in space. His name is Elliot, and he comes from Big Timber, Montana. So this is very special because he thinks back about his time on the ranch. Okay. There's a lot of preparation that he needs to do before he can become that first junior astronaut. And there is a girl that was the second choice. And if Elliot isn't careful, he'll take over or she will take over his position. Now, at the same time you're reading about Elliot, you read about this Maasai boy, Vincent Ole, who is living in Africa, and his father is a goat herder, and his life is so completely different than anything that you and I are used to. And Ben, to thoroughly research this book, not only did he go through the space camp, but he went and lived in a Maasai village, so he really knows what he's talking about. Now, Vincent's father wants him to be a goat herder just like him, but Vincent wants to do more with his life. And there is a doctor, another Maasai man who's a doctor, and in his little house, his compound, he has a radio. And so while Elliot is up in space, Vincent makes contact with Elliot, and they don't get along at first, but what happens in their relationship? A wonderful story, and Ben has gotten all kinds of awards because of this book. Another one of my favorite authors, and he's only done two things that I'm aware of, is Blueskin of the Sea. This is what we call a quiet book. This is about Sonny Mendoza and his cousin, whose name is Keo, and they're growing up on the big island of Hawaii. And it takes them from the time when they're like 7 and 8 years old through the time when they're teenagers. And one thing that happened to them when they were in 6th grade, well, when Keo was in 6th grade, Sonny was in 5th grade. This kid from California came, and he was going to really tell those kids, these Hawaiian kids that didn't know anything, what life was all about. And he said when they got up into the next level, the junior high, that they were going to have to, there were gangs and they were going to have all kinds of trouble. And Keo and Sonny bought into it. Now, Sonny, in order to get the protection that this California kid would get him, he had to go to the dump and shoot a cat. And when he goes there, he finds this little kitten. And of course, he can't shoot a cat. He certainly couldn't shoot a kitten. So what happens? What does this boy from California demand when he finds out that Sonny is not going to shoot this cat? Good story. Now, if you enjoyed Catherine Called Birdie or Midwife's Apprentice, reading about people in that age, you're really going to enjoy The Forest Wife. I really think this book and the rest of them I'm going to talk about are for 6th grade and up. So if you don't belong in that category, this is the time to cut the video. But The Forest Wife is about a 15-year-old girl named Mary who's living in that time period, the time of Robin Hood. And she's living with her uncle. Her parents are both dead, at least this is what she thinks. And the uncle has arranged a marriage for her, just like in Catherine Called Birdie, to an old man, and she does not want to have anything to do with it, so she runs away. And she's having all kinds of trouble when her maid catches up with her, and this is an elderly lady, and together they go into the woods. And in the woods is a woman that is known as the Forest Wife, and this lady knows all about herbs and living in the woods, and she's a very kind lady. She helps the villagers. Well, when Mary and her kind of nanny person get there, they discover that the Forest Wife has died. So then the nanny takes over the position of the Forest Wife, and she teaches Mary all of these skills. And it turns out that this nanny has a son, and he turns out to be Robin Hood. Neat story, and one that I think that you would enjoy. Okay, now moving on for those middle school books. Wanted is the newest one in paperback by Carolyn Cooney. She does such an excellent job. After I read this, I told my husband that he should read this, and he says, boy, she really gets into it right away, because on the very first page, Alice is living with her father. Her parents are separated or divorced, and father calls her and tells her he wants her to take a computer program that he's working on and get into his prize Corvette and drive to a favorite restaurant. Now this girl doesn't even know how to drive, and of course Dad has told her never to even touch the Corvette, and all of a sudden he wants her to do that? Why? She's all set to get in this Corvette when two men bust through the front door of the house, and she knows that they're there for no good, so she hides under the Corvette and she hears them talking. She knows that something has happened to her father. After they leave, then she leaves, and again, she's not too good at driving this Corvette since she doesn't have any experience, but she's bound and determined to meet her dad where he says that she needs to go. On the radio, she finds out that Dad has been murdered, and that Mom has gotten an email supposedly from her saying that she did it. And when she calls Mom, Mom says, now, we'll get you through this thing. We'll handle this. In other words, Mom has bought into this because there was a certain way that Alice sent her emails, and that's the way this email came into Mom. What's going on here? That's all I'm going to tell you. This is a great story. Another excellent mystery writer is Joan Lowry Nixon. This is her new one, Spirit Seeker. This is about a girl named Holly who is in high school, and she is going with a boy named Cody whose parents are murdered. And all of the evidence points to the fact that Cody did it. And of course, Holly is bound to determine that she is going to prove that Cody didn't. And that's all I'm going to tell you. Another good mystery. Interesting one for that has, well, it has boys and girls. This is about a boy that is in high school, and Ira is his name, and he agrees along with 5 other high school seniors to become part of this college experiment where they will be able to look in the future to their 10-year class reunion. They have submitted a lot of facts, and then they go into this room and they're put into this helmet, or this helmet is put on their head, and they do it one at a time. Okay, as they go into this room and they hear and they see things, how they're supposed to be at their 10-year class reunion, they realize that one of the kids is not going to be alive. at their 10-year class reunion. Okay, now what are they going to do? How are they going to keep this person alive? And there's a hacker that has hacked into this program to make it even more fun. Okay, Soldier Boy is about a boy named Johnny who is growing up in Chicago in the 1860s, early 70s. His dad, he never knew his dad. His mother was a prostitute and died when he was quite young. So he's being raised in this bar. And this fight promoter, discovered that Johnny could fight. And so right in the beginning of this book, Johnny is fighting in this bar, and his promoter tells him to throw the fight, to lose it. Well, Johnny doesn't want to lose the fight. He's always won, and he's got his fans there, and he's not going to disappoint his fans. So he wins the fight, and then he knows he's got to get out of there because his promoter is going to kill him. He will kill him for throwing this fight, for not throwing the fight. So he boards his train, he gets down to St. Louis, and he talks to an Army recruiter who talks him into joining the Army. So he does that. And he is sent to Fort Abraham Lincoln north of Bismarck, North Dakota, where he is learning to be a soldier and part of Custer's troop. Custer? Okay, so he goes over with Custer and his troop into Montana. And well, you know the rest of the story, and I'm not going to tell you any more. Hometown is a neat story about a high school boy named Border, whose parents again have divorced. He is living with his father. His father doesn't really tune into what Border's doing, so Border can skip school. He's got these friends that leave a lot to be desired. Well, Dad inherits the family home up in Minnesota. And so he takes Border up to Minnesota, this little town that is very patriotic, and the kids do pretty much what they're supposed to do, and Border really feels out of place. And what makes it worse is that Border's father was growing up during the Vietnam War, and he deserted. He went to Canada instead of serving in Vietnam. So, of course, he is known as the draft dodger, and Border becomes known as the draft dodger's kid. What happens? A neat story of this boy trying to get in sync here with the rest of these kids. Absolutely beautiful story, a place to call home. This is about a 15-year-old girl named Anna. She doesn't have a father. She is black, African American. Her mother is white. She has a younger brother and sister. Her brother's only like 8 months old. Her sister is in kindergarten. Like I said, they are white. And of course, Anna does not know her story because Mom won't tell her. Now, Mom is an alcoholic, unfortunately, and one day Anna comes home from school, and she doesn't see Mom's car, but she hears her little brother crying, and he's crying hysterically. And you know, when a baby cries for a long time, they have that kind of hiccupy sound, and that's what this little boy is doing. And Anna gets in the house. She picks up her brother, changes him because, of course, he's dirty. He's obviously been left alone for quite a while. Now, she takes her brother, once she gets him changed, and puts him in the stroller, and she goes to this park nearby. They live in the country. It's springtime, and so nobody is in this park. And she goes over this bridge, and she sees Mother's car in the river, and she realizes that Mother has committed suicide. She goes back home, and she's bound and determined to keep this family together. Her little sister comes home, and yet Anna is a straight-A student. She's bound and determined to make something of her life, and she questions all the way along, why, coming from the mother in the background she does, why does she have this desire to make something of herself? And that's all I'm going to tell you. There was an 8th grade English teacher that bought a copy of this book, and she said she read it that night and started giving it out to her 8th graders. And this was 4 weeks ago, and I saw her just a while ago, and she says, I've worn out, the kids have worn out this book. I need another copy. Excellent, excellent story. Those are all of the new things, but I do want to tell you about 2 things that have been around for a while. Sniper is an excellent story of a boy named Ben who's growing up on a game preserve in California. His parents own this game preserve. It's for cats, wild cats. They have to be gone, leaving the place in charge of the foreman. The foreman is in an automobile accident, meaning Ben has to take care of this place. Now, right at the very beginning, these cats start getting shot. And one cat is shot every night. And Ben, of course, is frantic trying to save these cats. So what happens? Who's doing the shooting and why? This is such an excellent mystery. And I know some of you might be familiar with it, but for those of you that are not, if you like a good mystery, this is it. This is about a high school girl named Ashlyn. Ashlyn has a boyfriend named Drew who has had problems. Now, Ashlyn is living with her mom. Her dad is always away on business. And into her high school comes a guidance counselor. And just to make it this story easy, I'm going to call her Janie. Okay, Janie asked that Ashlyn become her student aide, and they become very close. In fact, Ashlyn's closer to Janie than she is her own mother. Now, because of Drew's problems, Drew is seeing Janie professionally, and one afternoon he has an appointment with her at 4 o'clock. He goes into her office, discovers that Janie has been murdered, so he, instead of calling 911, he just freaks out, runs out of the office and out of the building. Unfortunately, the custodian is coming down the hall, sees Drew leave, goes into Janie's office, discovers that she's been murdered, calls 911, and of course Drew is arrested. Now Ashlyn is bound and determined that she is going to prove that Drew didn't do it. Even though he's had problems, she knows that he isn't capable of murder. Now, Janie, because of the closeness that she felt towards Ashlyn, in her willed her a picture that had been hanging on her wall. And when Ashlyn got this picture, she turned the picture over and there was something, a paper, taped to the back of the picture. She undid the piece of paper and she looked at it, and it was an official death certificate with her name on it. According to this death certificate, Ashlyn died, an official death certificate. Ashlyn died when she was 1 year old. That's all I'm going to tell you about this book. Okay, now, also, in your books, you're going to see movie tie-ins. You will see a lot of things like the Berenstain Bears and Cliffords and all of those fun things. You will see series books, and one that's really popular right now are the Animorphs. You will see more football books, and you can bet you're going to see a lot of Jerry Rice because I think he's cool. You will see joke books, and you will see a lot of activity books, drawing books. You'll see a lot of nonfiction things in your list. So I hope you have a great time and you enjoy your reading as much as I do. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.